People say every city has its own ghosts. But some places, some houses, are the ghost. I never believed in such things until the winter I found myself wandering through the ruins of a forgotten Australian town. A mining city once alive with noise and industry, now reduced to little more than hollow buildings, cracked roads, and the endless sigh of the wind through empty streets. They called it Yalanga, though most maps had long since erased its name. I hadn't gone there looking for history or adventure. I had gone because I was running, from my own failures, from a life that seemed to collapse no matter how hard I tried to hold it together. The idea of disappearing into silence appealed to me. I wanted to breathe without anyone watching, to sleep without deadlines or expectations pressing down on my chest. But the silence in Yalanga was different. It wasn't peace. It was waiting. I first heard about the house in the only pub still operating miles from the ruins. A man with half-rotted teeth and a heavy smell of stale beer leaned close and muttered, "Stay clear of it. End of Pine Street. Big old thing with a broken balcony. They say no one who's gone inside comes back right." I should have listened. But something in the way he said it, half warning, half challenge, stuck to me like a burr. That night, alone in my cheap motel room, I couldn't stop thinking about the house at the end of Pine Street. The thought twisted in my head until it felt less like curiosity and more like compulsion. By morning, I'd already decided. I would go. The beginning. The streets of Yalanga were cracked with weeds, every surface coated in layers of dust. Most of the houses were hollow shells, their windows shattered, their roofs caved in from decades of neglect. The air tasted of rust and ash, as though the ground itself still remembered fire. Pine Street sloped down toward the outskirts of the city. As I walked, I felt the world narrowing. Houses leaned inward, their shadows stretching across the street like grasping arms. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance, then fell silent all at once. And then I saw it. The house loomed at the very end of the street, a two-story Victorian relic sagging against time. Its wooden balcony hung crooked, its railings splintered. Shutters banged loosely against cracked windows, though the air was still. The front gate stood wide open, its hinges rusted and broken, as though it hadn't been closed in years. Even from the street, I felt it, a presence, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest. It was the same feeling you get when you realize someone's watching you from across a room, except this gaze came from everywhere. I told myself I was just imagining it, that stories in pubs were nothing but drunken tales. But my feet didn't listen to reason. They carried me through the gate, across the yard overgrown with weeds, up the sagging porch, and finally to the door. The knob turned easily, as though the house had been waiting. And then I stepped inside. The door swung open with a groan that seemed far too loud for the silence it broke. The sound echoed down the hall like a warning bell. The air inside was different. Heavier. Stale, like it had been trapped for decades, yet sharp with a metallic tang that caught the back of my throat. My first step stirred up a cloud of dust that glittered faintly in the pale light sneaking through cracks in the boarded windows. The foyer stretched out before me, wider than I expected. The floorboards creaked under my weight, sagging slightly as though the house resented my presence. To the left, a staircase climbed into shadows, its banister carved with intricate patterns now dulled by time. To the right, a corridor led deeper into darkness, lined with doors that all stood slightly ajar, like mouths waiting to whisper secrets. I paused, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My hand brushed against the wall for balance, and I realized the wallpaper was damp. My fingers came away sticky, as though the wall itself was sweating. I took another step. Then another. That was when I noticed the sound. At first I thought it was the house settling, the ordinary groans of an old building. But as I stood still, I realized the rhythm was too deliberate. A faint tapping, steady, like fingernails on wood. It came from deeper inside, from the corridor on the right. I swallowed hard. "Hello?" My voice cracked against the silence, pitiful and thin. The tapping stopped. The quiet that followed was worse. I forced myself toward the corridor, my boots crunching softly over plaster that had fallen from the ceiling. The walls here were even more warped, the wallpaper curling in jagged strips. Old picture frames hung crookedly, their glass shattered. The photographs inside were faded, water-stained, but I could still make out faces, families standing stiffly in front of the very house I was standing in, their eyes dull, their smiles unnatural. One photo in particular caught me. A man stood with his wife and 2 children. The wife's dress was elegant, her posture regal, but her eyes flat, lifeless. The children didn't smile at all. And the man, tall, broad-shouldered, looked directly into the camera with an expression that made my stomach twist. A half-smile that wasn't joy but something else entirely. Ownership. The frame was cracked across his face, splintering his eyes into shards. A chill ran through me. I moved on quickly. The corridor ended at a door slightly more ornate than the others. Its handle was brass, tarnished with age. As I reached for it, that sound returned, not tapping this time, but a faint shuffle, like bare feet on wood. It was on the other side. I froze. My heart pounded so loud I was sure whatever was in there could hear it. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run out the door, into the daylight, and never return. But my hand moved anyway. The handle was cold, so cold it burned. I twisted it, and the door swung open into a room that smelled of mildew and rot. The light from the corridor barely reached inside, but I could make out the shapes of furniture draped in white sheets. A sofa. A table. A tall grandfather clock standing sentinel in the corner, its glass face shattered, its hands frozen at 3 past midnight. And then, from the far side of the room, came a whisper. It wasn't words, more like a sigh carried through dry leaves. But it was enough to send every hair on my arms standing upright. I stepped inside, against every fiber of sense in my body. The door closed behind me with a slow, deliberate click. And I realized I hadn't touched it. The air inside the room pressed in on me like wet cloth. The faint light from the corridor dimmed as though swallowed by the walls. My breath sounded too loud, echoing back to me, uneven and ragged. I forced myself to move further in. Dust rose with each step, and the floor groaned like it hadn't borne weight in decades. The white sheets draped over the furniture swayed, though no draft touched them. Then came the sound again. Not the shuffle of feet this time, but something closer, sharper. A faint knock, 3 taps in quick succession. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, then from the ceiling above, then behind me. Too fast. Too deliberate. I spun, but the room was empty. My chest tightened. The air had grown colder. I rubbed my arms, but my skin still prickled as though invisible fingers trailed across it. And then laughter. High-pitched. Childlike. It slipped through the cracks of the room like smoke, thin and airy, echoing until I couldn't tell where it came from. It didn't sound playful. It was hollow, mocking, as if the child knew something I didn't. I backed toward the center of the room. My boot brushed against something solid. Looking down, I saw the corner of a mirror peeking out from beneath one of the dust sheets. For reasons I couldn't explain, my hand reached for it. I pulled the sheet away. The mirror was tall, its silver frame tarnished and ornate, its surface cracked down the middle. My reflection looked back at me in fractured pieces, my face broken and multiplied into jagged shards. I leaned closer. For a moment, nothing happened. Just me, pale, sweating, eyes wide in the dim light. But then, in the corner of the reflection, something moved. A shadow. Small. Quick. Darting past the open door behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. The corridor was empty. Silent. When I turned back, my reflection was no longer alone. A figure stood just behind me in the mirror, a child. Its face was obscured by long, stringy hair that clung wetly to its pale skin. Its clothes were ragged, hanging off a thin frame. But its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, too far to one side, as though its neck had snapped. I gasped, stumbling backward, nearly tripping over the sheet. My eyes shot to the space behind me. Nothing. No one. Just the room, silent and still. But when I looked at the mirror again, the child was closer. Its hair shifted just enough for me to see its mouth. A smile, too wide, stretching its cheeks until the skin threatened to tear. And then, the whisper returned. "You shouldn't be here." The words were faint, but they came from inside the mirror. My reflection's lips hadn't moved, but the child's had. I staggered back until my shoulders hit the far wall. My breath came fast, shallow, misting the air in front of me. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, the mirror was empty. Just me. Alone. I wanted to believe I had imagined it. That fear and shadows had tricked me. But deep down, I knew better. The house wasn't empty. And whatever lived here had just noticed me. The silence after the whisper was worse than the sound itself. It pressed against my ears, thick and suffocating, as though the house was waiting for me to respond. I forced myself forward, toward the mirror, half convinced that if I touched it, the vision would shatter like a dream. My hand trembled as I reached out. My fingertips brushed the cold, dusty glass. And it cracked beneath my touch. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot in the stillness. A jagged fissure spread outward from where my skin had met the surface, splitting my reflection into broken pieces. My own eyes stared back at me in fragments, wide with terror, multiplied a dozen times. Then, without warning, the mirror groaned. The crack widened, deepened, until the glass looked as though it were straining against something behind it. My reflection warped. The child's figure flickered into view again, pressed against the other side of the glass as if trapped within. Its hands slapped against the surface, pale and skeletal, smearing the inside with a dark, wet substance that looked too much like blood. The fissure spread faster. The frame rattled violently. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. And then it shattered. The mirror exploded outward, shards slicing the air. I threw my arms over my face as glass rained down around me, cutting through my sleeves, biting into my skin. A sharp sting flared across my cheek. When the shards clattered to the floor, I lowered my arms slowly. My breath hitched. Because the child was no longer in the mirror. It was in the room with me. It stood just a few feet away, head still tilted grotesquely, its hair veiling most of its face. The smile remained, wide, fixed, impossibly stretched. Its chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven jerks, as though breathing were a struggle. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The child twitched, its body jerking like a puppet on tangled strings. It took one step forward, then another, the floor creaking beneath its bare feet. With each step, the air grew colder, until I could see my breath pluming out before me. I tried to speak, to say anything, but my throat had closed. The child stopped just short of touching me. Its head lifted slowly, and for the first time, I saw its eyes. Black. Empty. Endless. They swallowed the weak light of the room, drawing me in, pulling at something deep inside me. I felt myself leaning forward without meaning to, as though my body no longer belonged to me. Then came the sound. Whispers. Not one voice, but hundreds, layering over one another, filling the room like a swarm of insects. They poured from the child's mouth though its lips barely moved. The words were distorted, overlapping, but I could make out fragments. Burned alive. He locked the door. Never free, never free. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't just in the air, they were inside my head. And just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of it, the child vanished. Gone. The room was empty again. Only broken glass glittered across the floor, and the grandfather clock stood silent, its broken face frozen at midnight. My knees gave out. I sank to the floor, gasping, my hands shaking violently. The whispers faded, but their echo lingered, etched into my skull. The house had shown me its teeth. And I knew it wasn't finished. I didn't remember standing up. My body moved on instinct, legs carrying me toward the door of the shattered room. The hallway beyond seemed darker than before, as though the shadows had thickened in my absence. The air pressed heavier now. Every breath tasted like mold and rust. My boots crunched over broken plaster as I walked, but beneath that familiar sound came something else, another set of steps. Light. Bare. Always a half-beat after mine. I stopped. So did they. I turned sharply. The corridor stretched behind me, empty. But the sense of being followed clung to me, crawling across my skin. I forced myself forward. At the far end of the hallway, past the crooked frames and peeling wallpaper, a door stood different from the rest. Larger. Its wood was darker, thicker, reinforced with iron bands that had rusted over time. Unlike the others, it was completely shut, no gap, no sway. As I approached, a strange hum vibrated in the air. Faint, almost imperceptible, like the deep thrum of something alive behind the walls. My hand hovered over the iron handle. It was cold, too cold, even compared to the damp chill of the house. My fingertips tingled at the contact, as though the metal recognized me. I twisted. Locked. I tugged harder. The door rattled in its frame, but the lock held. I pressed my ear against the wood. And froze. Something moved inside. Slow. Wet. The sound of something dragging itself across the floorboards. Then came a whisper, muffled but distinct. Help! My breath caught. The voice was weak, fragile, like someone trapped, dying. Against every ounce of reason, I whispered back. Who's in there? Silence. Then, a sharp knock from the other side. Once. Twice. 3 times. The same rhythm I had heard before. My stomach twisted. That wasn't a plea. It was an invitation. I stumbled back from the door. My heel caught on something, and I nearly fell. Looking down, I saw a narrow crack running along the base of the door, so thin I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been so close. And from that crack seeped a dark, viscous liquid. It oozed slowly onto the floor, spreading toward me. The stench hit a second later, coppery thick. Blood. I staggered back further, heart pounding, until my shoulder slammed into the wall. My eyes never left the door as the liquid pulled wider, glistening in the dim light. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The ooze retreated, sucked back beneath the door, as though inhaled by something alive. And the whisper returned. This time clearer. Stronger. Open it! The words slithered into my ears, not spoken but implanted. My hand moved toward the handle without my consent, drawn by the command. My fingers brushed the iron, burning now, searing my skin, before I wrenched myself back with a gasp. No! I croaked, barely recognizing my own voice. The house groaned in protest. The walls shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Picture frames crashed to the ground, glass splintering. The air throbbed with rage. I stumbled down the corridor, away from the locked door, as the whispers grew louder, layering into a chorus that chased me. Open it! Open it! Open it! I ran until my lungs burned, until the house seemed to shift and twist around me, leading me in circles. But finally, I burst back into the foyer, collapsing against the stairs banister, gasping for breath. The house quieted again. The whispers silenced. But I knew. Whatever was behind that door was waiting. And it wasn't done with me yet. The foyer's silence was unbearable. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty but expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath. I leaned against the stair banister, my chest heaving, the cut on my cheek still stinging from the broken mirror. I glanced toward the front door. The way out. But I didn't move. Some part of me knew escape wasn't that simple anymore. The house had noticed me, and the weight in the air told me that even if I stepped back into the daylight, I wouldn't truly leave it behind. My eyes rose to the staircase. The shadows at the top seemed thicker than those below, a black that light couldn't touch. Each step creaked under my boots as I climbed, the sound echoing like a countdown. Halfway up I paused. A draft swept past me, not downward from the upper floor as it should have, but upward, as though the house was exhaling into the darkness above. It carried a scent that turned my stomach, rot, damp earth, and faintly, unmistakably, burning flesh. I swallowed hard and forced myself upward. At the top, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with doors on either side. Unlike the downstairs corridor, these doors were closed. Perfectly aligned. Too perfect. The air here was heavier, the shadows deeper. The wallpaper had rotted into dark streaks, and the ceiling sagged in places. My footsteps seemed muffled, swallowed by the carpet that had once been red but was now a mottled black. Then I noticed it. Every door had a blackened handprint on it. Some small, like a child's. Others larger, elongated, distorted. Each print smeared down the wood as though someone had clawed at the door, begging to be let in, or out. I froze in the center of the hallway, my heart pounding, trying to decide which way to turn. That's when I heard it. A soft dragging sound. Like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It came from the far end of the hallway. I squinted, but the shadows there were too thick, pooling unnaturally, writhing faintly as if alive. The dragging grew louder, closer, until it stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, one door creaked open on my right. Just an inch. Just enough for darkness to spill out into the hallway like smoke. I should have run. I should have turned back down the stairs. But instead, I stepped closer, every muscle tight, my hands trembling at my sides. The door opened wider with a slow groan, revealing a bedroom. The furniture inside was intact, though covered in a thick layer of dust. A bed stood against the far wall, sheets yellowed with age. A wardrobe loomed in the corner, its door hanging crooked. A rocking chair sat near the window, facing outward, though the window was boarded shut. And the chair rocked. Back and forth. Back and forth. No one sat in it. I stepped into the room, each breath shallow. My eyes darted to the wardrobe. Its crooked doors shifted slightly, as though something inside moved. I froze. Then, from within, came a sound that froze my blood. Crying. A child's sobs. Thin, weak, muffled. Please! I backed toward the hallway, my throat dry, every instinct screaming at me to flee. But before I could move, the wardrobe door slammed open. Empty. The sobbing stopped. The chair ceased rocking. And from directly behind me, inches from my ear, came a whisper. You're in my room. I spun, but nothing was there. The doorway stood open, the hallway beyond empty. Then the wardrobe's darkness shifted. Not empty anymore. Two pale hands gripped the frame from inside, long fingers curling around the wood. Slowly, a face emerged, hollow eyes, stretched mouth, skin gray and sagging. The same childlike figure I had seen in the mirror, only now its body twisted grotesquely to fit inside the narrow space. Its smile widened. I bolted. Out of the room, down the hall, my boots pounding the carpet. Behind me, the wardrobe door slammed shut with a thunderous crack that shook the walls. I didn't stop until I reached the end of the hallway. My chest burned, my skin cold with sweat. The shadows ahead rippled faintly, waiting. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive. And it wanted me deeper. I pressed my back against the wall at the end of the hallway, chest heaving, ears straining for the slightest sound. The silence felt wrong, too deliberate, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. The corridor stretched before me, lined with closed doors, their blackened handprints seeming fresher now, wet and glistening in the faint light. I wiped my cheek with a trembling hand, and when I pulled it back, there was dust, and something darker. Blood from the glass cuts had smeared, streaking across my skin. The house wanted me marked. Claimed. A shiver passed through me, not from the chill but from movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, in the corner of my eye. The shadows along the floor weren't still. At first, I thought it was the candlelight from a broken sconce flickering against peeling wallpaper. But the light was steady. The shadows, however, shifted. Slowly. Deliberately. I froze. My gaze darted to the far side of the hallway. The silhouette of the rocking chair still bled through the half-open bedroom door I had fled except. There was no chair there anymore. Only its shadow, swaying gently back and forth on the carpet. My stomach lurched. Another shadow peeled itself away from a closed door, stretching unnaturally long across the hallway until it brushed against my boots. The shape was humanoid, but too tall, too thin, its limbs bending at impossible angles. I jerked back, pressing into the corner. My breath came shallow and fast, fogging the air. Then came the sound. Soft. Dragging. Like bare feet sliding across the carpet. But the hallway was empty. Nothing moved, except the shadows. One of them lifted. Not on the wall. Not on the floor. It rose, vertical, stretching upward until it stood tall against the ceiling. A human form, its head cocked at a sickening angle, mirroring the child's broken neck tilt. Its arms reached down, fingers impossibly long, brushing the door handles as it passed. The handles rattled violently under its touch. One by one. Clack. 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 Every door in the hallway shook. The whispers began again, seeping from beneath the cracks, voices pleading, sobbing, laughing, all at once. Let us out. Come closer. You don't belong here. The shadows thickened, crawling along the walls, spreading across the ceiling like veins. They converged at the end of the hall, blocking the stairway back down. Trapped. My heart thundered in my ears as I stumbled backward into another door. The wood was ice-cold against my back. The shadows crept closer, their forms stretching into arms, fingers reaching across the carpet toward my boots. Desperation made me reckless. I grabbed the nearest doorknob and twisted. To my shock, it turned freely. The door swung open with a groan. I didn't think. I dove inside. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the whispering chorus. Darkness swallowed the room. My breath came ragged, frantic, echoing off unseen walls. And then I realized. I hadn't brought the shadows with me. But something was already inside. The silence in the room pressed against my skull like a heavy weight. I stood in the dark, paralyzed, the taste of dust thick on my tongue. Slowly, I slid my hand along the wall, searching for a switch, a lamp, anything. My fingers brushed against peeling wallpaper, then cold plaster, then something rough and damp that felt almost fibrous, like old rope. A faint creak echoed, not from the floorboards beneath me but from the far side of the room. I froze. Then came the smell. Metallic. Coppery. The undeniable sting of blood. My stomach churned. I fumbled in my pocket for the lighter I had used to ignite a cigarette earlier that day. With shaking hands I flicked the wheel. A weak flame bloomed, barely illuminating a few feet around me. What I saw made my breath catch. The walls weren't bare plaster at all. They were covered in scribbles. Words carved deep into the surface, overlapping, gouged so violently that plaster crumbled around them. Get out. Stay. My room. Burn with US. The same phrases, repeated again and again, some in jagged letters, others in childish scrawl. The deeper grooves still bled faintly, as if carved freshly not long ago. The lighter's flame trembled in my hand. I turned, forcing myself to scan the room. In the center stood a small table. Upon it lay a collection of objects, rusted scissors, a broken doll missing its eyes, a cracked teacup filled with something dark and dried. Around them were bones. Small bones. Arranged in neat circles, bound together with decayed string. I staggered back, the lighter nearly slipping from my fingers. My heel hit something soft. I turned, the flame casting just enough light to reveal a bundle on the floor. Wrapped in stained cloth. Child-sized. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But the cloth twitched. A muffled cry seeped out, weak and hoarse. Help me! I staggered forward, instinct warring with terror. My hands reached for the bundle, but before I touched it, the cloth ripped itself open from the inside. There was no child inside. Only shadows. Thick and oily, they poured out, spilling across the floor like black smoke. They rose up, shaping into thin, grasping arms that clawed toward me. The lighter sputtered. No! I shouted, backing into the table. The scissors clattered to the floor as I swung the lighter wildly. The shadows recoiled for a moment, as though the flame hurt them. Then they surged again, faster, crawling up the walls, racing across the ceiling, circling me like wolves. The scribbles on the walls began to glow faintly red, pulsing in time with the pounding in my skull. Whispers filled the air, overlapping, deafening. They never left. She keeps them here. She keeps us here. The lighter went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And then a single voice, calm and close, breathed into my ear. Now you belong here too. The door slammed shut behind me. The darkness wasn't silent anymore. It pulsed, alive, filled with breath that wasn't mine. The whispers that had filled the walls before now quieted, melting into a single, unified murmur. A rhythm. A chant. I stumbled backward, hands groping for the door handle, but my fingers found only slick, damp wood. The knob had vanished. The walls throbbed faintly with red light, glowing from the carved words etched deep into the plaster. Stay. 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 The shadows crawled across the walls like veins, pulsing with every syllable. And then it stepped out of them. The keeper. At first, it was only a distortion, a denser patch of shadow that seemed to suck in the weak light. Then the shape solidified, tall, impossibly thin, its head nearly brushing the sagging ceiling. Its face was a blur, shifting like smoke, features half-formed and melting away. But its eyes, they were fixed. Two hollow pits glowing faintly white, not like light but like ash still burning. When it opened its mouth, the room trembled. You came here. It rasped, the voice deep, layered, as if 100 throats spoke at once. You stepped into my house. The floor groaned beneath me. Shapes began to crawl out of the shadows, small, contorted figures. Children, but wrong. Their limbs bent backwards, their faces stretched too long, eyes wide and empty. They surrounded the keeper like loyal hounds. I choked back bile, clutching the lighter in one hand, though its flame was gone. Why? The keeper's head tilted sharply, like a bird studying prey. Why do you disturb what cannot rest? I didn't know. I stammered, though the words felt useless in the suffocating air. You know now. The child shadows began to inch forward, their fingers dragging along the floor, leaving black streaks that hissed like acid. I fumbled for anything, something sharp, something real. My hands brushed the rusted scissors I had knocked off the table earlier. I snatched them up, holding them like a talisman. The keeper let out a sound that wasn't laughter but something close, a hollow, echoing vibration. You think steel can hurt what is already bound? It raised an elongated arm, and the shadows surged forward. I swung blindly, slashing the air. The scissors cut through nothing, but the sudden motion startled one of the child shadows. It shrieked, a high-pitched wail, before dissolving into smoke. The keeper's eyes flared. For the first time, it moved, fast, impossibly fast. One moment it was across the room, the next it loomed inches from me. Its face lowered toward mine, those ash-filled eyes boring into my skull. You don't leave, it whispered, breath colder than death itself. None of them leave. She keeps them. She keeps us. And now, she keeps you. She? I croaked, my voice barely audible. The keeper froze, its shifting face distorting violently. The shadows around us writhed in pain at the word. The red light flickered. I realized something in that moment. The keeper wasn't the master of this house. It was bound too. Enslaved. The true master, the she, was still hidden. But before I could think further, the keeper's hands shot forward, wrapping around my chest. The touch burned ice cold, sinking into my ribs, pulling. My vision blurred as my strength drained, my body dragged into the shadows, bleeding off its form. My last thought before darkness consumed me was not of escape, but of the truth I had stumbled into. This house didn't just trap the dead. It fed on them. And now it was feeding on me. The world dissolved into shadow. My body felt weightless, pulled down into a sea of darkness where no air, no ground, no time existed. The keeper's hands gripped my chest, cold tendrils seeping into my lungs. My heartbeat slowed, echoing like a drum underwater. For a moment, I thought it was over. that I had already joined the countless others who whispered from the walls. But then I heard her. Not the keeper. A different voice. A woman's voice. Soft, melodic, almost kind. You shouldn't have come. The shadows parted, and she appeared. A figure in white, though her dress was tattered, soaked in something dark that spread down to her bare feet. Her hair hung long and black, covering most of her face. What I could see of it was pale, beautiful, and wrong. Too perfect, too smooth, like porcelain that had been cracked and glued together again. The keeper dropped me instantly, falling back like a dog before its master. The child shadows shrank into the corners, whimpering. She was the house. Her voice carried through the walls, through the floorboards, through my bones. They all stay, she said softly, tilting her head. They came to me, and I kept them. You came too. I don't belong here. I managed, my voice shaking. I didn't know. You do belong. You came inside. You breathed my air. You touched my walls. Her lips curved faintly, though it was not a smile. You are part of me now. Unless. The word lingered like bait. My lungs burned as I struggled to breathe. Unless what? Her head tilted the other way, bird-like. You can't choose. Stay with me, forever, as they do. Your body will rot, but your voice will join the choir. The whispers rose at her words, filling the room with pleas, laughs, sobs. Or, she breathed, leaning closer, you can take my place. The shadows recoiled at that. Even the keeper trembled. I swallowed, my throat dry. Take your place? Her cracked porcelain face leaned so close I could smell the rot of her dress. The house must always have a keeper, she whispered. Someone to feed it. Someone to hold the others in. I am so very tired. The glow in the carved words along the wall pulsed violently, as if the house itself strained with hunger. My choices were clear. Stay, and become another voice among the damned. Or take her place, and bind myself to the house, enslaving every soul within these walls for eternity. The silence pressed against me, demanding an answer. My hand tightened around the rusted scissors still clutched in my palm. For one brief moment, I thought about plunging them into her porcelain throat, about fighting back with the last ounce of strength I had. But deep down I knew. This wasn't something I could kill. It was something I could only join. Her hand extended. Pale. Cold. Waiting. I stared at it, heart pounding, the whispers surging louder. And I made my choice. I can't tell you now what that choice was. Because you're reading these words, aren't you? You came looking. You wanted to know the story of the abandoned house. And by knowing, you've already stepped inside. The walls are listening. The shadows are moving. And now, it's your turn to choose.